Hello. What is this video going to be about again?
It's about misogyny.
Why would I subject myself to this video topic?
Because it's something we care about.
Well, yeah, sure, but what, do we hate ourselves now? Is this some sort of sick masochistic joke where we subject ourselves to internet criticism for fun?
Look, just say the line already.
It'll be okay, just start. Listen here, Colleen. If you don't go out there and you don't give it your all, then who else will? You started this for the sake of shoujo, and you're gonna end this for the sake of shoujo. This is your time, and no one else's. So you go out there and you don't give 100%, you give 110%. So put your chin up, put those shoulders back, put on that goofy lopsided smile of yours, and you make history. Now let me hear you bark for Colleen. Oh, 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 oh. Do any of you guys remember back in 2012 when professional weirdo Cole Sprouse made a Tumblr account, claimed it was a social experiment, and then dipped? Sorry to bring up old wounds if you happen to care about that whole incident, but I wanted to try a little social experiment of my own in the same vein. However, instead of being a former Disney star, I am a micro-influencer who enjoys talking about a niche form of feminine media. The premise of this experiment is as follows. I often hear the sentiment that people don't care about what demographics a manga comes from, and as long as it's good, they'll read it. This line of thinking is absolutely true. We should all be reading series from all walks of life. But more so, I do see this sentiment used as a way for people to avoid saying that they don't read shoujo or josei. Just as a refresher for anyone who doesn't know, shoujo and josei are manga that target young girls and women respectively. I have a whole video on that moving forward. I wanted to test out my theory on whether or not demographics actually don't matter to most people. So what I did was make a recommendation thread on Twitter without putting any demographics or labels of the series that I said were great. I then added a bunch of shoujo and josei series from a range of different genres, posted it, and waited for the results. The first few hours after posting this thread were the same for me as usual. Some retweets and kind words about making the thread, but nothing more than that. But then it happened. I saw the first unmistakable sign that my thread was doing as intended. I got the word mid in my notifications. Then I saw a few X clears all. Then I got a "Are these all shoujo?" From there, it spiraled for the next 24 hours of people responding to my thread, letting me know that the series that I put in this were bottom of the barrel. At worst though, some people specifically pointing out that straight men avoid this thread, or pointing to my profile picture to say why the series I recommended were not going to be good or for them. I set out to prove a point, and it seems that points were proven. Now, clearly, it's not like this shows that everyone is like this. I even did sarcastically egg people on by the end of the thread, just in case anyone didn't realize that everything I recommended was targeted to women. This was not some academic thought experiment in any way, but just a fun little way for me to test out my theory, and if I'm being honest, a great segue into starting this video. To me though, it does reinforce the idea that many people actually care way more about demographics than they like to believe. Not in the I'm above caring about what gender demographic a manga comes from kind of way though. Why was one thread praising shoujo and josei manga on the receiving end of such hatred? There's plenty of manga recommendation counts already that talk about how great the big three, Chainsaw Man, or Slam Dunk are. Why is highlighting series that women tend to gravitate more towards seen as a slight on the male demographic? Well, if I say this, you know what'll happen.
Just say it.
It's misogyny! Yay! I imagine now that this is going to be the point in time where either someone turns the video off or already left a comment about how everything I haven't even said yet is actually wrong. I just have to know that that's going to be the nature of the internet. But to those who stick around to hear me out, hey, thanks.
I appreciate you hearing me out. I'm not going to try and spend this video explaining that misogyny and sexism actually exist. So if my colored hair and my pronouns already discount my opinion to you, then, well, not much more I can do. I want to get into the manga side of misogyny and nerd culture, but first let's just acknowledge how it's reared its head in fan communities previously and currently. Misogyny and sexism in nerd culture have always been a hot topic in franchises like Star Wars or comics. This is no special issue that's just in the manga community, but in fact most big fandom spaces as a whole. I believe that the manga space is just special in one aspect of its misogyny that we'll get more into later. It's not a secret that nerd spaces, for a majority, are seen to be dominated by men. This is the case for anything from Marvel to video games to anime and manga. If you ask some random person who wasn't involved in any of these communities, the first kind of person that would come to mind when you mention them, they would probably say man. The erasure of non-men in these spaces drives the image that nerd culture is just a watering hole for the boy in glasses who in a stereotypical teen movie is going to be sneered at by the cheerleaders in the hallways. This mentality is not only pretty outdated because nerd culture and media has become prevalent and popular in the last decade or so, but also because non-men have always had a large presence in all of these spaces. Take, for example, manga, which before the manga boom of 2020 was largely consumed by women. Reading has always been seen as a more feminine hobby, and statistics have shown that men consume more television. The boom in manga over the pandemic has made people think that enjoying manga has always been male-dominated, though, especially with recent successes of Shonen Jump series like Jujutsu Kaisen and Chainsaw Man. Due to this, non-men are usually excluded from their own fandoms and questioned on how much of a real fan they are. With current discourse in the community on TikTok being, do women enjoy these series for the clout now?
Because it's not an interrogation, it's actually just communication and conversation.
The reason why I labeled what your video was interrogation was because of the way that the message was sent. You're more asking us to prove our worth as a nerd by proving that we've watched shit, you know? Instead of just saying, oh, what have you watched? You're saying, show me what you've watched. That's what we don't like. That's why we stay away from people that talk to us like that, because it's very demeaning.
Make it seem like anime has always been popular amongst women. It hasn't. There are a lot of women that are just now getting into it because it's popular now.
We just cycle through this conversation every few weeks, but since it's free content, they're seeing a lot of girls getting into shonen and seinen when the girlies have been into shoujo and josei since the 90s. Sailor Moon, Fushigi Yugi, Boys Over Flowers. The girlies have been into anime, just not what you like.
The men who do this wield their superiority as a way to reclaim their masculinity in a sense. Increasing equality and visibility for women and queer people and characters threatens a sphere that these men see as being the one place where they can be dominant, where they can be recognized as masculine. We've seen this ring true across the last several years, time and time again. Masculinity in nerd culture has fallen threat to realistic female characters, destroying the perfect gaming experience. She-Hulk twerking with Meg the Stallion, bringing the downfall of Marvel, and so on. Representation for marginalized groups in nerd spaces is seen as a threat to these circles of masculinity that these men have thought to be their safe spaces. The reality of the matter is that non-men have always been present in these fandoms, but have had to create their own circles so they can be free of harassment when they show an inkling of interest in the same hobbies as men. So what's any different about the way the manga community utilizes misogyny to put down the non-men that are present? Well, it comes down to the fact that demographics in manga are overtly gendered. Shoujo, shonen, josei, and seinen are all manga demographics that are gendered from young girls and boys to adult women and men. The way manga is produced in these categories easily lends itself to the community using certain demographics as a way to wield their misogyny. It's easier to cast a wider net of putting down non-men when there's entire subsections of a space that are catered to them. Don't like women in your manga community? Use shoujo or josei as a shorthand to put down their interests. On the flip side, don't like women commenting on your masculine power fantasy? say that the series isn't made for them. I also think that the manga community's misogyny is a symptom of the larger problem in the manga industry as a whole. Going back to the masculine power fantasy I just mentioned, the editorial staff of Shonen Jump, one of the biggest manga magazines in the world, has been noted to be similar to an all-boys high school. The staff that work on these boys comics are basically just entirely made up of men, with an official response from Shueisha, the company that owns Jump, being, "You have to understand the hearts of boys to work there." This is backed up even further when you look into what people and editors who have actually worked there say as well. In an excerpt from a manga called The Right Way to Make Jump, the editor-in-chief of the magazine is seen to be saying that not a single woman works there, even stating that if he had the ability to, he would make the magazine even more manly. Once again, he recites that to work for Shonen Jump, one must understand the hearts of boys. However, another Shonen Jump staff member has mentioned that they would like women to work in the department with them, although they joked that they would rather be scolded by a female boss than a male boss because they were a masochist. Now, I can hear all your complaints. Well, if Jump says you need a boy's heart to be an editor, then that makes sense. It's manga for boys. And sure, I guess that makes sense. But let's look at shoujo magazines for a second, shall we? Most shoujo and josei magazines don't have a single female editor-in-chief, with men being prevalent on that side of the industry too. When Shueisha was asked to comment why shoujo magazines frequently employ male editors despite their ability to understand the hearts of girls, they gave no comment. A paper written by Bryan, Hikari, Kartzheim in 2015 also points out that, in contrast to shonen, 75% of shoujo magazines had male editors, while it was dominantly women mangaka that wrote the stories. What I almost find worse is that in this same paper, people who work for Jump justify the exclusion of women working as editors for their magazine because the male mangaka might pursue them. They cite other shonen magazines that have these issues with their male mangaka that these female editors work for getting stalked, or the male mangaka being unable to hold back their affections. When these male mangaka and male-dominated magazines need a female perspective, though, they often will go to female editors at other magazines and ask them intrusive questions on their personal lives. The paper suggests that in opposition, the male editors that work for these shoujo magazines are respected for their emotional distance from the stories as they didn't grow up with shoujo, only furthering the hypocrisy since Jump says that shonen is better produced by men who understand the hearts of boys. I also think looking at the shoujo manga series, Stupid Love Comedy, can give you somewhat of an insight into how the manga industry views shoujo works as a whole. This is a semi-autobiographical manga series about a shoujo mangaka that is notoriously lazy in her department, and she gets paired up with a new and young male editor. One of the very first pages of the manga has the male editor commenting, "I was once at the top, but then I was transferred from a seinen magazine to a shoujo magazine." The male editor views moving to a shoujo magazine as a demotion, and his entire character in the story basically hinges on his realization that he can still make great works of manga even working at a shoujo magazine. Even a little later, when the shoujo mangaka main heroine gets an assistant, he comments on how making shoujo is quite easy, going on to say that the onomatopoeia and dialogue in shoujo is funny to him because he finds it more frivolous. This series is still a work of fiction, but in a similar way that people use the shonen manga series Bakuman to get a peek into the Shonen Jump processes, I feel like Stupid Love Comedy can be used in the same way. It gives us a small look into how shoujo mangakas work with editors and assistants, with most people in the series being men who work at the shoujo magazine with our main heroine. They even mention that there's only one woman who works in the entire editing staff, which can further reflect how common it is for men to be working for shoujo magazines, but not the other way around. This commonality will just lead more people to think that non-men have less interest in manga on a corporate level and a social level. That's the corporate side of misogyny and sexism in the manga industry, but let's shift gears a little bit to see how this can perpetuate in the critical and fandom space as well. specifically the Western side of the manga community, since that is what I see more of and can confidently give insight on. For example, when Viz released its first ever Shojo Beat magazine in 2005, an article was written for IGN reviewing the material inside. The article has since been archived on the Wayback Machine, but it's a shock to read what the author wrote. Full of very internally misogynistic attitudes towards feminine media, which I think is no surprise coming from something in 2005. Now, while I don't want to condemn the author entirely because this article was written years ago and they probably have changed since then, it's definitely worth looking at still. The article starts with them saying that they had major doubts when Shojo Beat magazine was first released, but they were still willing to give it a shot. However, they continue on to say that everything in the magazine was boring except for a 2-page Full Metal Alchemist ad. Continuing on that every manga present in the magazine was piss-poor content that was poorly drawn and poorly written. Might I add that the manga that were present in the first ever Shojo Beat magazine were series like Baby and Me, Nana, Godchild, Crimson Hero. The list goes on. One of the worst lines in this article being that Nana is a story about a teenage girl who sleeps around with every guy she meets and wonders why she can't land a boyfriend. Hey honey, here's a hint. Why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free, right? Now, I want to specifically point out the last part in this article that feels especially like a jab to many women who enjoy manga. The author says, if you have a teenage sister, this would be an easy, fun, and affordable way in which to introduce yourself to manga. However, if you're a serious manga connoisseur, don't waste your time or money. It is this comment that put the nail in the coffin for me, clearly stating that shoujo or josei fans who enjoy these series are not serious manga fans and could never be, thus closing the door on a large part of the fandom that enjoys these series and their complex stories. Effectively isolating non-men, telling them that they aren't real fans unless they read series that are made for boys or men. As someone who is part of the shoujo and josei community though, I can definitely say that this sentiment is not unique to the writer of this article. Much like in this article, the manga community often holds the same ideology even 17 years later. That shoujo or josei manga are less than in comparison to their male demographic counterparts, so anyone who enjoys them isn't a real fan of manga. I leave room in the way that I am speaking because anyone can enjoy shoujo and josei manga. But it does need to be stated that a majority of the people who enjoy shoujo and josei are women, which is why when so many men use overgeneralizing terms to discuss shoujo and josei, it devolves into misogyny fairly quickly. This could be intentionally or unintentionally for all I know. However, when you look at the people who use these overgeneralizations to speak on media that is made with girls and women in mind, it quickly becomes pretty obvious that thinly veiled misogyny is at play. A Reddit poster saying that all shoujo is trash and even the best pale in comparison to shonen series. Ending their post with, they're not misogynistic because of this since they generally like josei. A Twitter user saying they enjoy making fun of girls manga because the community will always find a way to call you misogynistic over 2 words. A YouTube comment saying that it's actually girls manga's fault that boys aren't interested in the demographic because it's not varied enough. All easy and digestible shorthand that manga made for girls and women has inherently less worth. I even tried to take away the Japanese terms and translate it into what it would mean in English. Girls comics, showing that this verbiage inherently just makes fun of manga that is targeted to girls. Instead of looking inward as to why the male portion of the community refused to read girls manga, they instead blame the demographic itself. Which comes back to why I am often skeptical of the argument that I read anything as long as it's good, when it comes to manga. Even when complimenting manga made for women, many people have a hard time not saying a backhanded remark on girls' manga overall, often stating that the one shoujo manga they think is good is an exception but not the rule. One review of the series Wake Up Sleeping Beauty remarks that the art is actually really great and avoids what you expect from shoujo. If you want something to prove that not all shoujo is subpar, read this manga. Another reviewer of the series Mars remarks that they aren't a fan of the shoujo genre and transcends the trappings of the genre.
I'm not a girl.
For the last example, a reviewer of the series Hoshizora no Kurasu states that I thought it would be boring like every other shoujo. It is one of the few shoujo I love and respect. If all of these series are unexpectedly good for shoujo, then I think as a community we need to finally accept the fact that manga made for girls has just as many duds and stars as any other demographic. These subtle forms of misogyny by putting down media with young girls in mind is reminiscent of the days of Twilight popularity. Say what you will about the franchise as a whole, but the misogyny that came from all sides to point at young girls and make fun of them for liking a book series was everywhere. Girls couldn't get away from being made fun of for liking the fantasy romance escapism, and I can attest to this because I too made fun of my friends who were girls for liking the series because it was too girly. I wasn't like other girls at the time. I was into Harry Potter. Like I keep saying, the misogyny in the manga community is not a special occurrence by any means. It's a symptom of the larger issues as usual. Lastly, I haven't even talked about non-men who face almost harsher criticism when they're into series in the male demographic such as Naruto or Berserk. Constantly being asked if they know anything about the series that they're talking about, or if they even give a slight criticism on maybe how a female character is written, they're told that the series isn't for them, so therefore they don't get an opinion.
I'm just saying that, as a woman, why would you enjoy MHA?
Maybe, and this may be a bold statement, maybe My Hero Academia is just fun to watch. And all the girls in the comments that are like, oh, but the male characters, stand up, queen. Stand up. There's not a single character good enough to make you sit through 5 seasons of a show.
As an outsider in the shonen and seinen communities, because I'm not an active participant and I mostly am just a casual reader to begin with, I just see how my friends get talked down to because of their opinions. The criticisms that they receive are just as ostracizing, trying to other them from the community as if they don't share the same interests in the same manga. The people who I know who are into these demographics of anime and manga are always incredibly insightful, bringing a perspective to a series that maybe others haven't thought of before, and working just as hard to make quality content as their male peers. However, while the misogyny and sexism I face in the shoujosei community isn't really directed at me, the misogyny they face is much more personal. The attacks aren't about girls as a monolith or the series that they love, but often directed more towards their intelligence or their character, not to power scale misogyny that non-male creators face or anything. So how do we end this video? Oh cool, I'm on my own. Well, let's get personal for a second. I have been making videos on YouTube about mostly manga for around 4 months now. I don't necessarily identify as a woman, but I am acutely aware of how I am perceived in this community and the people in it. I am passionate about shoujo and josei getting better representation in a community that has all but decided it's worthless. But the more I speak up about non-men needing better representation for their interests, the more I see the community hate on media made for girls. I speak out about my passion in a tone that doesn't fit how I'm expected to act, and I'm immediately seen as combative. It's assumed that I hate shonen because I love shoujo. It's assumed that I'm a new manga fan because of what I like. And it's assumed that I know little to nothing about manga in general. I came into doing YouTube hoping to open more people up into enjoying shoujo. And yet, more often, I'm feeling personally responsible for the hate that shoujo is getting from my peers simply because I've been vocal. None of this is to say I'm ungrateful though. I've had some really lovely messages from so many people making me feel like what I am doing is worth it. I've also made some amazing friendships and found some new wonderful YouTube channels to watch. But when you come into a space where you see the faces are mostly male and you don't feel welcome, there's a problem. Whether you consider any of my points or not is up to you. I felt good about that. That was good.
Just don't look at the comments, baby.
What? But you said it would be okay. We barked together.